Committee to order. I could use the gavel. There we go, look at that. That's it. Oh, I gotta turn my sound on. Jackie, you hear us now?
Yes, I can.
All right, perfect. Yeah, so we're called to order. Mark, do you want to call the select board to order? Chris is in the room.
Yes, indeed. Thank you. So I'd like to call the select board to order. Thank you.
Good. Jackie, Andrew, good to see you both. I think we're missing Joe. There's Joe on cue, walking into the room. So we are full staffed. Okay. So thanks everybody for attending. I like the new quarters, although Gene doesn't like the new quarters. I like the new quarters. I feel powerful. I feel good. I got a gravel and everything. This feels good to me. All right, so I know most of you here for the school budget presentation. We're just going to take we'll take the motion.
I move to take the vote to authorize snow and ice deficit spending agenda item out of order.
Second.
All right, we gotta do a vote.
Yeah.
Okay. Jackie, can I get your vote on taking that agenda item out of order?
Yes.
Andrew?
Yes.
Mary Ann?
Yes.
Yes.
Jean?
Yes.
Joe?
Yes.
Jeffrey?
Yes.
Eric? Ed, yes. The first in many unanimous votes tonight. I don't know about that, but. You wanna take this, snow and ice?
Yes, sir. Thank you. So this is I think something that happens every year, right? The snow and ice line in the operating budget pursuant to Chapter 44, Section 31D of Mass General Law is the only line that it's allowed to run in deficit, right? Without approval. Of course, we don't like to do that. So what we're asking is so far the winter has been rough. We've had a few pretty large storms, including the one last Friday, which took us right to the edge of our budget. So we're around $576,000. So what we are requesting is approval to allow us essentially to go to town meeting and request a replenishment of this line. So if approved, it doesn't affect the FinCom reserves. It is more a request, an acknowledgement that we, based on the winter we are having, we believe that we are going to be in deficit on this line.
And so Fidel, we're going from 576 to 675, is that right?
correct. That's correct.
Okay. Cool. Any questions, comments from the committee?
Do you have any idea how far above it you're gonna go?
We don't know.
I mean,
Jen Kinsella and I had a conversation this morning. It's hard to tell because it's, we always talk about the April Fool storm, right? I mean,
Right.
so it could be no more snow for the rest of the winter, or it could be a few more. And with snow and ice, obviously, budget is not a question. We're going to be out there. We're going to be salting and plowing, and safety is our priority with snow and ice.
And does that include building up any salt reserves for the next season, or would that be separate?
I mean, we do have a salt pile, right? A shed essentially, but we only have enough storage for a large storm. So even on Friday, we got 2 deliveries, right? So the there's a likelihood that you know, if we order salt at the end of April, you know, it's gonna be saved until next year, but it's not gonna be a lot.
Yeah, got it, okay. So that's just in case we have a storm, so another one.
Exactly. Exactly. You always want to have that full, just in case.
Any other questions? Cool. I'll take a motion.
Thank you.
No, just, well, if you just need the number.
Oh, thank you. Move to approve incurring liability making expenditure of FY 2022 in excess of available appropriations of $576,000 to $675,000.
Second.
Thanks, Mark. All right, go to a vote.
Hold on a second. So,
Yep,
but the motion that you just said, I mean, we have a budget that's 675,000 already, right? I think the motion should be approving expenditures in excess of the budget. That might need to be,
Thank you.
accounted for at the Springtown meeting. So
Thank
we're
you.
approving incurring liability and expenditures in excess of the budget, which
You're
is
absolutely right.
675.
You're absolutely right. I read the wrong thing. Can I make a friendly amendment that
course you can.
Jeffrey do the motion?
yes.
Thank you, Jeffrey.
The Finance Committee would then move to approve incurring liability and making expenditures in excess of the budgeted expenses for snow and ice removal.
Thank you. Second.
Sometimes it's easier to do.
All right, now we'll go to the vote. Start with Jackie.
Yes.
Andrew,
Yes.
Mary Ann,
Yes,
Mark,
Yes.
Jean,
Yes, with gratitude.
Joe,
Yes.
Jeffrey,
Yes.
Eric, Ed, yes. 9-0. Thank you. All right, that one's done.
Are you gonna take the ladder truck?
Yeah, so that was on the same one. So it was vote to authorize snow and ice spending. Oh,
I don't think I moved to do that one. We're doing that one out of order too.
yes.
Move to move the agenda item, vote to approve FinCom reserve transfer for ladder truck and ambulance equipment out of order.
that's a different agenda.
Second.
Let's go to a vote. Jackie,
Yes.
Andrew,
Yes.
Mary Ann,
Yes,
Mark,
Yes.
Jean,
Yes.
Joe,
Yes.
Jeffrey,
Yes.
Eric,
Yes.
Ed, yes. 9-0. Little did you know this was gonna cause so much strife to take these out of order.
Thank you very much for it.
Yeah, no worries.
It is deeply appreciated. So the at the last FinCom meeting, Bob Littleshore acknowledged that inflation, right, and equipment costs is really going to be something that is going to be in the recurring conversation. So the what's before you tonight is an example of that. So in our capital plan for FY22, we budgeted to replace a ladder truck for the fire department, and Chief Burns is here today to answer any questions. So we budgeted $1,300,000 in capital. This was an estimate that the chief obviously obtained from the vendor 18 months ago, as we were preparing the budget for FY22. So we went out to bid, and the bids came back. The lowest bidder was Seagrave, who's a very qualified company and provides a lot of fire apparatus to all communities in the country. We are allowed to negotiate with the vendor, but the vendor quoted, just higher prices in steel, higher prices in labor, and essentially gave us a bid that was $67,000 over our capital budget. So essentially, we have two options. We can we can scrap the bid and rebid, right? In the hopes that it's gonna be lower. But as we all know, and the conversations around the country is that it's not gonna happen, right? I mean, with inflation is only going to make prices worse in the short term. Or we can request that the finance committee appropriate the additional funds that are needed to purchase a truck from your free cash reserves. Sharon, our town accountant, drafted a memo. So far, this year, you've had one request for the COVID kits, which we 100% will fund from ARPA, and that's been approved already by the select board. So in theory, this is going to be the only request that it is going to use your reserves, and you know, barring any unforeseen conditions, we don't expect to return this fiscal year.
Any questions from anybody?
Can I just clarify that, so that would leave our reserves at about 53K going into town meeting, because right now we start with 200. So we put 80 for the COVID kits, and then that left 120 minus 67,
That's
53.
exactly right.
So that's,
Yep.
so there's still some going into town,
Yep.
you know, for the month we need for any other things.
That's correct.
The agenda has ambulance equipment, please.
No, this is just for the fire truck.
Is it wrong on the agenda?
Yes, it is wrong on the agenda. I apologize.
All right.
I know, quick question either for you or for the chief. So, so this is just the bid. We haven't ordered.
We cannot
It's
order.
$550 from the day that you order.
That's right. That's right. So we cannot order it because we don't have sufficient funds to
Gotcha.
sign a contract.
And then also in the materials too, you said, so Bob had already reached out to Rep. Brad Jones if they could fund it.
That is correct.
And so that's
Exactly.
still
It's on the
pending.
table. Absolutely. So
Yeah.
Bob has reached out to our state delegation. This is a time where earmarks are made into the budget, and he's requested $90,000. And our state rep, Brad Jones, feels really positive. This is a feel-good project, right? I mean, it's a fire truck. You know, we need it. It's not an option. So he feels pretty good that it's going to be included in the earmarks in the next budget. Which, if that happens, we essentially would return the funds used to free cash.
Gotcha. Any other questions from anybody?
I mean, just so curious, like how long do these fire trucks like tend to last? Like, what's the typical life?
Yeah.
This truck should last between 15 and 17 years.
Oh, great, okay.
Of daily use. Generally, an engine we keep in service for 10 years. Then it's 5 years first line backup, and then 5 years second line backup. So an engine we keep for 20 years, but 10 of it's reserve time.
Great, okay.
And this truck is from 2008, but we're not going to get it for another 2 years. So at that point, it's really going to be
End of life.
exactly
Yeah.
on its last leg.
Any other questions, comments?
We try again?
That's right, yeah.
right.
Second chance. You only get so many.
Move to approve a transfer of $67,000 from the FinCom Reserve Fund to be applied to the purchase of the fire truck discussed in this meeting.
Second.
Thanks, Mary Ann. All right, move to the vote. Start with Jackie.
Yes.
Andrew,
Yes.
Mary Ann,
Yes.
Mark,
Yes.
Jean,
Yes.
Joe,
Yes,
Jeffrey,
Yes.
Eric.
Yes.
Ed, yes. 9-0.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, Chief. All right. And I have both of these signed too for afterwards. All right, cool. All right, so now we can go back to the agenda in order. We'll just kind of go around and do some rapid fire liaison reports. So I'll start, we'll go right to left because I'm just, to keep things interesting. Eric, anything on your end?
No.
Jeffrey?
We got plenty from the schools today.
That's right. Joe?
No.
Jean?
No.
Mark?
No.
Go ahead, Mary Ann.
I can just update for the select board. Last night, there were a couple of financial related actions. They voted 4-1 to offer, in accordance with our charter, a 1-month bonus salary to the town manager of approximately $17,000. And that will be, I believe the motion said it was subject to appropriation, right, Chris? Yeah, so that, I don't know whether we would have to discuss that in the future. I think it's up to Sharon, but we certainly, thanks to the good efforts of our town manager, we have plenty of free cash and budget money to handle that. They also discussed a potential 19 million in water and sewer capital improvements, some of which are definitely in the pipeline, some might be coming down the pipeline. I think there was, some hint of, do we want all ARPA to pay for this, and ARPA shouldn't just be for water and sewer, so that'll come up when ARPA subcommittee comes up. And the other money item that was mentioned was Coolidge lights to handle things during the turf project, but they indicated those lights would be paid for by a mix of recreation, soccer, and lacrosse. And that was just it for money things there.
Yep, you cut all the high points there. Jackie, anything from you?
Just an update, I think I mentioned this last time, but the RMLD will present before our committee on March 23rd on the payment in lieu of taxes, and the next RMLD board meeting is on March 24th.
Great, thanks, Jackie. Andrew, anything on your end?
Oh, thank you.
Nothing on my end. I let Mary Ann steal my thunder. So we're good on liaison reports. All right, so let's move on now to the budget presentation for the schools. Appreciate folks here, Tom, Susan, and then Carla and Tom and Sean on the school committee for joining as well. Right. I should have looked earlier. My bad.
Nope, it's all right. Any particular spot you want us for folks at home?
We like you to roam. Anywhere you'd like to be. Anywhere you're comfortable.
Yeah. As long as our CTV has the camera on that, not the person talking.
Okay. That's the camera here.
Okay.
Great.
Sorry, we're.
Yeah.
All right, well, good evening, everyone. It's really nice to see you, and thanks for having us tonight. I think a few of you had said this is tough timing. We're in the middle of RMHS playoff season for the athletic teams. The boys basketball team is up 4 going into the fourth quarter, I just heard, so.
Oh, there we go.
So for those of you who are following along, but again, thanks for having us tonight. We're excited to share a little bit about what's going on the school side. I know a lot of you have been to the school committee meetings over the past few weeks. I was also followed along with some of the information that we've shared. So tonight we're just going to try to provide a high-level overview. First, just what you'll see in the FY23 recommended budget, and also pause at that point and then take a shift in the conversation to talking about beyond FY23. As we know, there's been some questions from FinCom members and the community around just sort of what's on the horizon for the school. So we'll start with FY23, and I'll turn it over to Susan.
Sure. The next slide, please, Jackie. Thank you. So again, this evening we'll focus on two areas. One is the FY '23 recommended budget as voted by school committee and our beyond FY '23 discussion. Thanks, Kathy. Thanks, Jackie. Next slide, please. Oh, thanks. So very briefly, the recommended financial summary for next year's budget reflects a total of $51,783,363, and this is an increase over this year's appropriated budget of $2,087,365 or a 4.2% increase. And this sum of money was in alignment with the FinCom's guidelines and guidance. The next slide, please, Jackie. Of the incremental increase, the $2.1 million increase, $871,000 or close to 72% of this increase over FY '22 is focused on new investments and priorities, and we'll get into this presentation exactly how those dollars will be reflected in our budget. And then a baseline budget of $1.2 million. These dollars support all of the contractual obligations and legal mandates of our school department. The next slide.
Susan shared too, speaking a little bit about new investments. We've tried to bucket our new investments in three areas or three priorities that emerged throughout the budget process, which, as we shared, the budget process was really built by listening to families, spending time with students in classrooms, spending time with staff, trying to make sure that what we are prioritizing aligns to what the views and the needs of our students and our families and our staff. Three major priorities. First, to improve academic outcomes and growth for students within safe, equitable, and rigorous learning environments. We've noticed significant gaps in learning due to the interruptions in learning over the time of the past couple of years of the pandemic. Similarly, we've also seen a significant impact of the pandemic on both on students' social and emotional needs. So you'll see a heavy investment in supporting our students social and emotionally. And then last, trying to streamline adult practices and operations to be a more efficient and effective sort of district at the top. So next slide. So we're going to walk through just what are some of these investments. Again, we'll speak at these at high level, and then we're happy to talk through some of them more specifics if you would like after. So the theme of improving academic outcomes first. You'll see that we are recommending to reduce the full day tuition fee for kindergarten from $4,450 to $3,600. We will spend some time tonight talking about full day kindergarten, but we think it was important for us to make a first step in moving towards universal full day K for our families. Second, an increase of 1.2 FTE in support for our EL students. We have seen a significant increase in the amount of English learners in our district, so we feel that this staffing will get us closer to sort of what the ratios we need to effectively support the needs of our EL students, both academically and social emotionally. And then something that is a pilot for us this year, there were two cohorts of students, one at JE, one at Killam, where we dropped down from 4 classes to 3 due to enrollment. And in both of those shifts, we felt like it was important to provide additional support in a cost-effective way. So something we're piloting is a partnership with the Endicott Fellows Program and the Merrimack Fellows Program, where for $20,000, licensed teacher who is a fifth-year student in the graduate program, and the benefits are covered by the Endicott and by Merrimack, and they will be a full-time staff member for those particular grade level teams. So again, there'll still be 4 teachers on those grade levels, just split up a little bit differently, and we think that's a model for us to pilot something innovative and creative to meet the needs of our students. Next slide, Jackie. Something high school related. Seeing significant gaps in in academic need for our students at the high school level. We're going to be launching an academic support center at Reading Memorial High School, which is staffed by a 1.0 coordinator and 2 teaching fellows. This is a center that's meant to be the hub of interventions and supports for students. So we can streamline sort of all of those additional interventions for all students across the building. We're the plan to increase our academic support by 0.2 in our Stepping Stones program, which is for students returning from hospitalization. We've seen an increase in students needing that level of support, so fully staffing that program, which right now is 0.8, we think is critical for supporting student needs. And then lastly, something at the high school really excited about is we have heard from students and families the need for us to expand programming in a way that aligns to student interests. We, in terms of computer science, over the past few years, we've had one computer science class for an AP computer science. So we're expanding our computer science FTE by 0.4, which will allow us to offer 2 new courses, an intro to computer science class and a Java C++ class. We think that this is hopefully the beginning of launching a more comprehensive pathway at the high school, given that we have so many students who are coming in with interests in the computer science world. Also, something we piloted this year, which we're planning on building on next year, is a dual enrollment program. So for those of you who aren't familiar with dual enrollment programs, this is a trend, I think, in education that's really taken off over the past several years, where students are able to get credits in a class at RMHS, and when they take the class, they get both RMHS credits and college credits. So through our partnership with Endicott College, for example, there is a criminal justice class that we now offer where students, when they take the class, they'll get 3 Endicott credits and the RMHS credits. During that time, they're also considered a student at Endicott. They get Endicott transcript. They get access to both the online and on-campus resources. So we have plans next year to kind of continue to build on that as ways for our students to leave RMHS with college credits in hand to make them more competitive sort of as they look at colleges, and also to open doors, we think, for a lot of students. And then lastly, there is an investment in our Gateway to College program at North Shore Community College. This is an early college program for some of our at-risk students who are at risk of dropout due to significant shortage in credits. So this is a pathway for some students to have a different sort of road to get to move their way through high school and into college. Next slide, please. Sort of on the academic side, shifting to supporting students' social and emotional needs. I think I've shared this with the school committee many a times, our school committee many times. Just the level of social and emotional needs right now is at a level that many of us have never seen. And I think, quite honestly, we're just starting to scratch the surface of it now. And I think I see some of you in the room who've shared personal testimonies of just your own students and how they've been. So I think in this budget, we really try to be mindful of how can we make sure that we provide our students with more social and emotional support to enable them to be more successful at school. So the biggest investment in the budget for us has been a dual role of an adjustment counselor with a METCO coordinator at every elementary school, which is funded half by our operating budget and half by the METCO grant. This will allow all of our schools to have a full-time counselor in the building, which we think is a foundational need for us right now. This will give students access to timely social and emotional support. And also, we feel like we'll give our Boston resident students and families more access to support and be a liaison between, the Boston community and the Reading community. We're planning to add a 1.0 FTE social worker to REACH program, which is our therapeutic support program, where we feel like we needed some additional support for our students. And also increasing social and emotional support through adjustment counselors at the secondary level. One school counselor at Parker, which will equalize the support at both Parker and Coolidge, and one at RMHS. The school counselor at RMHS will not just be an additional guidance counselor. This is someone who, if someone is in need of additional social and emotional support, sort of outside of college counseling, sort of job support, they will be able to have that support through this additional counselor. And then lastly, under supporting students' social and emotional needs, we are planning to add 1.0 FTE nurse, which will allow our current nursing director to be a full-time nursing director. Currently, our nursing director is also the lead nurse at the high school and the lead nurse at Rise. And if we can imagine this year, especially in our pandemic context, how challenging that is, I think, having at least 3 full-time roles. We're excited that we think this will allow us to better support the health needs of all of our students in our buildings. Next slide. And then our last slide of sort of new investments. First, this is not a financial investment, but something we wanted to loop back to. We made a significant investment in the ESSER through the ESSER grant in team chairs, which we'll speak to more in a little bit. And we feel like we need to, or we're excited to try to make sure we use those roles to meet a lot of the other needs that we're seeing in our schools. Social emotional needs, just the operational demands on principals, et cetera. And then 2 things that do have financial implications. One, we're going to increase our data specialist role by 0.4 FTE, which will enable us to better collect, organize, and utilize student data in real time to equip teachers with data they need and to be able to plan interventions and supports, and to also support our students to have timely access to all the different apps, all the different programs that they need to access consistently online. And then we have heard from our teachers time and time again, the need for us to invest in their development and the growth as teachers. So we've shifted some funds to be able to allocate more towards professional development of teachers. So that's a high-level summary of just some of the additions to the FY23 budget. And I think, again, are not only in response to what we're seeing in the current pandemic context, but also in line with what we've seen from spending time talking to students, spending a lot of time with staff in classrooms, and spending a lot of time meeting with families. So we'll pause there to see if there's any questions about sort of what we have here in FY23. And then we do want to move into talking about beyond, because I know there are also potential implications for beyond that impact FY23 as well.
Go ahead, Mary.
I just have a couple of questions. The additional adjustment counselor for the high school, I mean, I think you said something like it will be more than a guidance counselor, but will it still serve as a guidance counselor as well, too?
Good question. So this won't change the sort of student, the guidance counselor to student ratio in terms of each student will still have their go-to counselor, right? This will not be an additional sort of guidance counselor. What this will be, as we played it out, is if someone goes to their guidance counselor saying that they need additional support, right, social and emotionally, or if a family comes in and say, my child's really struggling with this, this will be a person who that is trained, that is there to support them with sort of what they need in that moment. The guide is different than sort of the guidance counselor. We're not also going to put them in as a guidance counselor. It's going to be just a separate
Okay,
support.
because I'm asking because I know, I think under, is it the ESSER grant, you have temporarily an additional counselor, and I've heard that that's been a really big help, and that it would be nice to be able to continue that beyond the grant, that it's relieved the load for the guidance counselor, so.
Correct. That's our plan. I think that that's one of the roles that we feel again, it's hard to anticipate what the sort of the social emotional need will be like next year, but we have a hard time envisioning that the need will become less, that's a role that we really want to move away from. We feel like the high school is really in need of more social and emotional supports for students.
Okay, and then my other question is just on the data specialist, because I've followed the school budgets a few years, like 10 years, and I've seen
Just
this
a few.
position kind of come and go.
Yeah.
And there was a person, I think her name was Courtney Fogarty, who did it for a while, then she went back, she was part-time because she went back to school. Do we now have a person in that position and we're just gonna be adding more hours to them? Because it seems like there's been a lot of transition in that position.
There's been a lot of transition in that, and I can speak to I can't speak to 10 years of background.
No one
I'm
can.
itching 10 months, I'm getting there, but, so the context that I have is that when Courtney transitioned, our central office team made a decision to not fill that role because we didn't quite know exactly what the scope of work of Courtney's work exactly looked like. And I think having that gap this year has given up, I think, two major holes for us. One, the work that Courtney and her team did with getting like students up and running on apps, on programs, on things. We had classrooms waiting and kind of lag time to get them up and running on speed, and she did all of that just sort of behind the scenes. So I think that was one key part to our role that we felt an impact. The second was in terms of all the various assessments that we have for our students, that she did a lot of the work of collecting all of the data from all of the assessments, organizing it, and help, kind of supporting central office and principals to be able to have, and teachers to have that data sort of in quick time. Now we've realized this year the data, without having someone in that role, the data has just been collected and then sort of sat there, right? And hasn't got back into the hands of teachers quick enough. So I think as we think about this role moving forward, it's finding someone who can help sort of with the kind of the up to speed with the apps programs, getting someone who can help collect and organize the data. And also I think the next part is help to coach and support our leaders and our staff in effectively using data to plan instruction. That's sort of the goal of that.
Yeah, so because my question is we're gonna hire someone and we're gonna be able to get someone for only 0.4 FTE? We're not adding 0.4 onto some other existing position?
Yeah.
Okay.
So if 0.6 is, its budget is, we still have the 0.6, so we're adding to make it full time.
Oh, okay, but it's vacant now,
It's vacant now.
so we're, okay.
And
No,
I think
understand.
part of the strategy with that too is when we have put it out for a 0.6 position initially, we've learned through listening to candidates that candidates we would attract at a 0.6 for this role is very different than the pool we'd attracted at 1.0. So I think that was also another factor in this, in addition
Yeah,
to
you're
the-
getting why I asked, because I thought it was just a 0.4, and I was gonna say, good luck.
Yeah, good luck.
Thank you.
I'm glad I avoided that.
Go ahead, Jean.
I just have a couple of comments and I do have a question. One comment, and I'm one of 9, so I'm just speaking for myself. I found the level of this presentation perfect. I read the school budget, I felt like I knew the details, but this was very helpful, so I just wanted to commend that. I also wanted to note that I really appreciate the delineation between baseline increase and new emerging priorities increase. I think that's different and I really like it. If my math is right, big question, I did it quickly on a calculator, it looks like it's about 2.5% to maintain level services and then the additional 1.7% is emerging priorities. I'd like to commend the school department on that too. We obviously live in a state with a 2.5% cap. I will tell you historically 4.2 is a pretty generous budget by writing standards. It is not typical. So I was really happy to see that the baseline budget is at the 2.5% and that you're managing to that. That's phenomenal. And I'm thrilled to see the alignment with clear goals. I just feel the alignment to goals is really there. My one question is, you mentioned adding a nursing position, and I can certainly understand in the current context why that would be necessary. Do you think it's possible in the next couple of years in a post-COVID world that nursing needs might decrease? Or is this something you see being a permanent addition to the budget?
Great question. We spent a lot of time talking through that with our nursing director, Mary Juliana, too. I think we see that currently as a major need for next year. We have a hard time seeing in FY23 how it's also not going to be a significant need. Beyond that, it's really difficult to forecast.
Okay.
Or would like to think it may not, sort of the demand on our nurses will lessen over time. But I also think that even pre-COVID context, there was, a lot of the community had felt that this was already a need. So I share that to say we're not quite sure, but I think definitely a need in FY23.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of related to Jean's last question. I know it's very subjective, but have you thought about like any metrics, to try to look at the impact of some of these positions? Yeah, when you need more of them, when you need, less, which ones are successful, et cetera, so.
Great question. So I think there's a few of them that naturally, I think, have easier ways to kind of quantify impact. And think about, for example, something we're going to track closely is the deployment of the teaching fellows, which for us we think is an innovative model, which a few we know local districts have tried and had some success with in terms of student outcomes, and we think that's a pretty easy way to be able to measure potential impact. Some of these other roles may be more difficult to quantify, but we're certainly looking forward as we move on. You'll see we get to beyond FY23, we have some hard decisions and trade-offs to make, right? We have to be able to have some data in front of us to say these are the strategies that have sort of, proven to work. And these are some of the ones that we haven't seen the return on investment that we want. I would say a lot of the other things too, we're trying to ground in research too. For example, we just launched our February Vacation Academy for the first time, which is a way for us to try to close some gaps in learning for some of our students. And that's driven by what a lot of sort of research says now around, in the pandemic context, is giving students extra time on learning with like sort of a targeted sort of skill-based support. So we try to launch the academy in that way to see is this something that worked for us to have 1 week to target in this way. And we have some data that came back to say in some ways it worked, in some ways maybe it didn't. And I think we're trying to think that way through all these things. I know Susan is pushing all of us to constantly think about our return on investment being strategic with what we're kind of thinking through. But some of them I can't say with confidence that we have fleshed out what exactly are the metrics that we're going to be looking at to quantify success.
And with the data specialist position, like how far do you think you'll go with that? Like, what's examples of like what you'd capture with that information? Like, visits to counselors or, I'm not sure, like how far are you thinking of that?
Yeah. In terms of this counselor role or in terms
just like the
specialist
data specialist, right? So.
Yeah, I think it's a couple of things. I think it's first how quickly we're able to get all of our students up to speed on all the platforms and programs that we're using. I think that's one sort of foundational piece. Two, I think it's reports from principals about how quickly they had student achievement data in their hands that was actionable, and then feedback from teachers, right? How quickly did they feel like from the time students participated in various assessments that they had data turned around that was accessible to them in their hands. So I think some of that is it. I also think some of my own things that I'll be observing is what is the impact of this, this person's role on supporting organization to use data more effectively. So when I go and I watch our student support teams, when I go and watch our grade level planning, how are they using the data that's in front of them? So I think some of them are more quantifiable, like the time time it takes to get data, the time it takes. Some of them are also going to be more, observational from our team, more qualitative. to observe what is the impact on this and creating a school district that more effectively uses data to support student learning.
Great, yeah, thanks.
Go ahead, Jean.
I actually just want to follow up on what Joe said. I think that was a really good question. And I think I think when it comes to education, it's really fair to say sometimes you can't quantify it, and you really can't, and that's okay. It's education, it's human beings, like I get that. But when you can, it can be really powerful. So I think that's just great feedback to hear that when it is possible to say, and people are probably tired of me talking about the science curriculum, but many, many years ago, we made a big investment as a town in science curriculum. And 2 or 3 years later, you saw the fifth grade, is fifth grade they take science?
Yes.
Yeah, fifth grade MCAS science score was like this. And you were literally able to point and say, we bought this new curriculum, we implemented in a few years. Like, you can't always do that. And I get that. And I would not say the school should always do that, but boy, when you can, it's powerful. So I think that's really good kind of advice to give moving forward.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's good feedback, thank you.
I had a couple questions, or just on the, and we talked about Endicott a little bit, just, and that's the teaching fellow too, right?
Correct.
Is it just coincidence that the credits for RMHS and the teaching fellows are both at Endicott, or is it a happy coincidence?
It's a happy coincidence, and also I think we've tried to partner with a lot of local universities
Yep.
kind of in this way. And it just so happened that those were two, Endicott happened to be kind of separate parts of the organization, eager to dance with us in both of those in those worlds. So I think Endicott is a college that's been very eager to partner with local schools and districts. I think they've been willing to think innovatively, willing to think creatively, willing to kind of think outside the box with things. And I think a few of us in the central office team have also worked with Endicott in the past. We've also explored partnerships with Merrimack for the Fellows Program. And we've also tried to launch partnerships with some other local universities and other ways that they can contribite to our improvement efforts.
And just on that one, on the teaching fellows, how rare is it, or like how many districts do you know that are doing it today?
Yeah, the interest they've been up to about 20 to 30 districts over the past few years. A lot of local districts have built up strong partnerships where every year they have 7-8 fellows built in. I think what's been interesting this year in working with Endicott is usually they have a really deep and strong pool of candidates, right, to choose from. It's a really selective program. I think that they said this year it's been a smaller pool of candidates to select from because a lot are just jumping right from graduating college right into jobs instead of deciding to take that smaller pay and fifth-year master's sort of program. So they have a smaller pool to choose from this year. And Endicott told us that they actually had to, not fulfill their partnership, commitments with several returning districts because they just didn't have enough candidates. We're fortunate that they bumped us to the top and allowed us they've committed to having, candidates. They've already sent us one who's been interviewing with both schools. But it is more tricky, trickier in this context because of just the job market, and that's impacted the fellows program too.
And so is that typically like where you want it from that fifth year, kind of graduate, that's the sweet spot versus someone that might be just in their last year of just regular graduate work? Or?
Correct. They attract candidates who have finished 4 years of an undergraduate program with ed degrees to then just move into the 1-year master's program.
Gotcha.
And I think we have a few fellow graduates in our in the teaching ranks here in Reading who are really good teaching. I think the program is really well regarded.
So any other questions from anybody? Go ahead, Jerry.
On the dual enrollment credit, do you have a sense of, clearly if you went to Endicott, those credits would count for something. Do you have a sense of how that plays out with other universities versus maybe in comparison to AP credit?
Great question. We are living this right now. So I can tell you a little bit about, I'll try not to bore you too much with the context, but this year we said we just want to get dual enrollment off the ground and running. So we piloted 2 courses this year that we had to fit into the schedule, right? That they didn't align sort of where the schedule naturally was. For example, now they live in our advisory blocks, our flex blocks for our seniors, which isn't ideal for programming, right? We just want to get them off the ground and running. Next year, we decided to move it to the next level. Let's try to build these into the schedules so the classes actually occur sort of in alignment with the rest of the classes at RMHS. So we have 2 classes that are in the program of studies that now students can already select that they know they're dual enrollment classes. Now we think what we're trying this year, which is I think really exciting for us, is Endicott has said is a way to potentially move this partnership to the next level. and this is, we're just working this over the past couple of weeks, we are willing to look at all of your program of studies, match it with our own program of studies at Endicott, and choose which courses already are sort of similar, and then allow your teachers to teach those classes as adjunct professors and RMHS teachers. So then Endicott recently took a look at our program of studies and identified dozens of classes that could potentially fit the bill as dual enrollment classes. Right? So what our department heads have now done is they've gone through and said, in our departments, which one or two do we maybe want to pilot as a dual enrollment class that would be no additional cost to the school, right? We would, in this model, have to have students pay, $150 for the dual enrollment class, something like that, which we'll think through. Again, we're still in the planning process. But to have that, they would then take that class sort of already just that's in the schedule, that's taught by a teacher, an RMHS teacher. So that, I think, is exciting for our staff. I think that's exciting for our students and will allow us to really expand it. Now, in that conversation, it gets to your question, we're trying to learn which of those classes are the ones that would have the most sort of like transferability into the next level. So we've been working with Endicott to say, hey, here's maybe 10 classes that we're thinking around dual enrollment. Which ones of these do you think would, kind of transfer to other universities? Because that's the real bang for your buck. If the student can take say an arts class at RMHS that would count and they get 3 Endicott credits, if that could knock off an elective for them at, anywhere else they go, that's a huge savings. And that's also opens up doors for other classes to take. So I think we're trying to look for those classes that transfer sort of the easiest, and we're in that process now of identifying them. I think the ones we've identified now, Endicott has sort of worked through us to say, like, introduction to criminal justice, they think is going to be accepted in most sort of colleges and universities and can complete a lot of sort of prereqs in a lot of different kind of content areas.
And how does that work with our semesters end in mid-January versus college courses end in typically December?
So these are all the things that we're working through now. And I think what Endicott has said is we want to be a partner, we want to make it work. So while we have a couple of ideas, like some of they can be, like right now the classes end earlier, right? And they're kind of on the college schedule, right? So the students are cramming more work into a shorter time and have a little bit more flexibility on the other end. Next year, they've worked more within our schedule and said, we'll kind of map and align to what the RMHS schedule is. Now, moving forward, which model makes more sense? I don't know. I know we have a partner who's very eager to make the schedule work for us and to be flexible on that. I know there were some seniors who were excited about taking dual enrollment classes to say, I might finish up a few weeks earlier than I would have to give myself some flexibility too. We've also talked about, like, Endicott has done some classes that are short, like 6-week modules. Do we ever want to explore shortening classes and creating other flexibility for students? Again, I think these are still, very early on conversations with, Principal Tracy. I think Lynna Williams has been instrumental, our Director of Guidance, and also our department heads.
Jeff, just to follow up, because my son's gonna be a senior next year, and he's looking at the dual enrollment classes. So it's different classes for next year, but they have 2, they said they were 15 weeks long. One was Introduction to Human Services, which is something like with the helping professions, because we had to go to the Endicott course catalog to look. And I think another one is Introduction to, I think it's International Relations. So they don't precisely map to things, existing RMHS classes that we could see. So they're 15 weeks, which I think is like a semester, but yet it says 4 credits. So just to give you a picture of that, what they're doing next year offered to seniors, those are the 2 Endicott classes. And just as a follow-up on Endicott anyway, with teaching fellows, we happened to be touring that college last week. They do more internships than a lot of other schools. So students are already coming out of there with 3 different internships. So if you get Endicott students that have come here as fellows, they've already had other experience. They have an inverted curriculum. They start in a major right away. So it's an interesting place to partner. Just we happen to be visiting it anyway to see. So how would 15 weeks work with RMHS schedule? Would that be like, it counts as a full year class, but it's only a 15-week class?
Yeah, so I wish Lynna Williams were here to
Yeah, I would love to ask her.
Because she's been living this and making it, mapping out, so I don't want to misspeak on that. I do know that she's been working really hard to kind of fit it within and had to be flexible. I want to go back to your other point, though, is that the 2 classes in the current program of studies for next school year are the classes that will be, we're going to be taught, the 15-week classes by endocott professors, right? Those are like endocott
Right, not
classes.
RMHS professors,
This
yeah.
idea to have our RMHS, teachers as also adjunct professors would be in addition to that and would latch on to what the current, some of the current class offerings are. So that would be kind of another separate like way to have dual enrollment, right? Than the one we have in there now, if you're following kind of what that would look like.
And my just last follow-up was, what's the cap on the number of students that can do this? Like, we're clearly paying a certain amount and these professors are saying, we'll take on this many students.
Yeah, so for the classes right now that are the ones that we're offering next year that are already built in, the human services and then the
International relations.
Those are capped at 25, and those are ones that we pay for in the budget. It's right around $4,000.
About $4,500 per course.
And now the other model would be, and I know this, sorry for those of you who aren't super interested in dual enrollment, but it's for the other model, it would be that we currently are exploring it, sort of the students would pay for the credits, but still in endocott it's around $300 per course. And the students in that class would have a choice on whether or not they want the credits. You could be in the same class, you could be in this, say a yoga class and decide you want the college dual enrollment credits, or you may not. It's just you'd have to pay that fee. So I think we're also looking at what is kind of the scholarships and support we would need to make sure it's accessible to all learners. But you just kind of in the problem solving, planning phases with us, that's where we're
All
going
right, this
now.
is just the first, thanks.
Yeah, let's talk about this some more. I'm just joking.
Financial question. And I feel a little bad because I can tell that you're just at the beginning of this and we want to know all the details, which clearly haven't been ironed out. But I do want to make sure, I think I heard you say that while a student might opt to pay money to get the college credits, the course would be open to all students regardless of ability to pay.
Correct.
So a student could say, I don't need the college credits, but I really want to take that
Correct.
course. Excellent,
Correct.
thank you. Thanks. Awesome.
Yeah, go ahead, Mark.
I do have a budget question.
There you go. Back on task.
So, on your summary schedule of what you gave us, I was looking at, the FY '23 versus the FY '22 budget versus, FY '21 where we ended up. So when you do an overall increase from FY, 21 to 23, it's a considerable increase. And there's some areas that I don't know if you've looked at, like is the actual spend gonna really be there? And, in particular, I look at like the special ed, it's been, pretty flat at, 12 to 13 million over those actual 3 years. The budget last year jumped up to 16, just over 16 in FY '23, 16.9. So do you have like a forecast for 22 where you think it'll come in?
Sure. Mr. Zorro, we received your questions and thank you so much for forwarding them to you. I wanted to point out that on the inside front left cover of your notebooks is a consolidated list of all the questions that were submitted by you and your select board, along with responses, so you could refer to
Okay.
this at your leisure.
Please don't
But-
expect it.
Bar is set right here. Bar is set right here. They get the power of position. So now,
Sharon, hold on.
you're there, Sharon?
Oh, my blood. So, Mr. Zorro, in terms of the relationship you pointed out between FY '23 and FY '21 for the entire budget
Yeah.
along with regular ed and special ed, on the summary of annual expenditures in the budget book, I think it was on page 20, those dollars reflected actual expenditures. They excluded the total amount of money that was encumbered at year end. So when you factor in total expenditures plus the amount of encumbrances at year end, the increase between 23 and 21 is 9%, not 21%.
Yeah.
And on the first and second page of that Q&A document, I broke down for you what the true percentage increases by encumbrance. Because those encumbrances are very likely mostly going to be spent. There was, however, an increase of 21% in special ed between FY '23 and FY '21. And that's driven by the social emotional conditions that we reviewed just a few minutes ago, adjustment counselors at the elementary and secondary levels, and the nurse. And it also includes cost of living adjustments, contractual obligations, and projected out-of-district tuition and transportation. We expect that at this point in time, at the end of Q2, we were expecting a year-end balance of about $440,000. But we are working on ways to identify what are some of the ways immediately that we can implement this spring to accelerate students' learning. And we're identifying services like tutoring services, direct services to students between now and the end of the year that will essentially spend down that projected balance. So I hope those.
Yeah, I'll read through it, I didn't get to see it, so I'll read through
You
that.
just saw it tonight for the first time.
Yeah, all right,
So please reach out if
Yeah.
it doesn't answer your question.
yeah, I will.
That actually touches, if it's okay,
Yeah.
that touches on a question I had. So one of the things we need to sort of do is project free cash regeneration moving forward. It sounds to me like there is a move towards using money as much as possible in the current school year. So is it safe to say that we should not anticipate ongoing regeneration from the schools as we have historically?
As the town has over the past 5 years.
Yeah.
Prior to the past 5 years, it looked like the school department budget was probably less than $100,000 at the end of the year. But we'll see in one of the slides that we're presenting to you this evening that over the past 5 years, there were significant balances turned back to the current each year.
Yeah, the last three were, 19 was 200, 20 was 400, 21 was 800.
Yes.
So, yeah, and so I think that
There's
was,
some
I think
outliers.
that was a similar, you know, kind of probably
That's right.
observation, and, you know, knowing philosophically.
20.
Yeah, knowing philosophically what, you know, what the plan is going forward, I think that help informs, you know, kind of what to expect going forward as well. You know, so if it's, you know, if there's going to be, you know, an effort to pivot, you know, to identify other needs, which is, again, you know, I think intelligent and smart to do, but it does have an impact as far as what you might historically have expected from a regeneration or things that get turned back. And I think this was another, you know, I think a question among some of us on FinCom is that if there weren't things identified like that, but you were still turning it back, is there a way to be able to look at turning it back to something else? You know, like full day K or something, you know, something else along those lines too. So it's, you know, so it's interesting, I think, to know the philosophy around it, just so you know what might or might not be available for other uses.
And I could add that every quarter we produce a quarterly report, which makes projections for year end. So if the finance committee would like, we could share a copy of that quarterly report. I did include a copy of the Q2 report in the back of the questions, just to, you know, be informed about how the school department's finances are moving forward. So
That'd be great to see.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
Thank you.
yeah.
So you do the actual, then you have a forecast for the rest of the year? Yeah, that'd be great to see.
Yeah, Chris?
Thanks, Ed, Tom and Susan. I just wanted to comment, if I could have redone my career choice early on, it would have been a lawyer, but sorry, Gene, I didn't want to take science classes. But seeing the C++ and the Java for the computer programming on there, if I had access to that instead of Odell Lake and Oregon Trail back in the day when I was in school, it would have been a lot different. So for our students to be able to have access to that kind of stuff is just, it's fantastic to see, because just like the trades, computer programming is not going out of style in the next 50 years, whatever. They're always going to be in demand, and you're giving them a significant leg up, because C++ jobs are, you know, they're paying. Same thing with Cisco and all that, so, no, I really appreciate seeing that in there.
it's interesting hearing Chris's feedback too, when we share this with staff and with students, they say, great, but that's still not enough, right? For like, in terms of what the demand of for students is in the computer science field, and it's growing, and then the market, you know, there's such a need too, so I think we see that, and we'll talk tonight about some of the other areas too, but I think I agree with you, and that's definitely what we've been hearing from the community.
Yeah, so why don't we dive into the, and kind of move on? Because I know we could ask, you know, kind of some of these other questions, all night long, but, let's move into the.
Hey, Ed?
offense. Yeah,
I'm sorry to interrupt. Jackie and Andrew have their hands raised.
that's too bad. Yeah, no, we'll start with Jackie.
Thank you, and maybe will be covered in the slides. Per Jean's initial question or comment about the baseline budget numbers versus emerging priorities, I see in the report we're looking at a 58% baseline and just shy of 42% emerging priorities. Do we have like recent historical information on how baseline versus emerging priorities has broken out over recent years? I think that's helpful to kind of understand the relative burdens of the contractual obligations and mandated services versus our ability to kind of respond to those emerging priorities as they evolve over the years.
Great question.
That's a wonderful question. I would have to do some research on that. I wouldn't be able to address that question this evening.
As a very quick answer, and Jean might have more history as well to this, but a very quick answer is we didn't look at it that way before. But if you think about the positions added in the last few years, they have not been in the operating budget. And so we'll talk through some of that with Esther. The operating budget has essentially been baseline. Last year was essentially a baseline budget. We didn't have to do any cuts or anything else along those lines, but we didn't add staff or any projects or anything else with that. The only other thing I would say that we added a little bit maybe on top of that was purchasing for our math curriculum, right? So that's the other thing that kind of hits that. You could argue that's baseline because it's a core competency that has to happen, and our math curriculum was really poor before that. It had to happen, but it wasn't pure baseline if you want to think about how you define baseline, Jackie. So
Didn't the override add a few things?
Go ahead.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add is I was on the school committee in the override was 2019, right?
2018 for the FY19
For the FY19 budget. I was on the school committee at that time, and I can tell you during the years leading up to the override, we did not have enough of an increase to cover baseline. We were cutting. So the years since that 2019 period are very, very different than the years prior. We did not have enough budget increase to just cover the baseline, never mind new priorities. So just wanted to add that historic information in.
Go ahead, Andrew, or unless Jackie had another question. Sorry. All right, good. Go ahead, Andrew.
Thank you, Ed. So this pretty much hits on the same thing Jackie's kind of alluding at, is trending data. My question is, you know, I do commend the school committee for giving us the information on the baseline data at 2.5%, but 2.5% on top of 49 million is a whole lot different than it was 7 years ago, right? So if you look at the school committee budget 7-10 years ago, it's vastly different. So when we say 2.5%, that's more of a sorry, laryngitis, excuse me. That's more of a, I like to look at the real monetary value to that. And it's, if we keep increasing 2.5% every year, that's an egregious amount in 5 years from now, right? So are we looking at the trending data as far as baseline costs or contractile agreements goes, and what's their increase then every 2 to 5 years? And it's more or less the same thing Jackie was saying, but do we have the data or trending data associated with that?
I'm preparing a multi-year financial model that looks at that in the future. I haven't gone back to look at the past, but we are building such a trending model now. So
Great, great, thank you. I was just asking, I think your presentation is great. FYI, I just want to say that. You guys did a great job sending out the documents and presenting. I just am curious as the projected data, FY25 or where we're looking at trending wise for the town.
Perfect. Great, thanks, Andrew. Thanks, Jackie. All right, so let's go, yeah, let's kind of pivot into the more of the numbers now.
So Jack, you can switch to the next slide. Thank you. I appreciate all the questions and all the feedback there. I think it's a lot for us to think through too. And so while tonight's conversation was, we thought the chunk was gonna be FY23, we also wanted to just be transparent with the FinCom to what are some of the other things that are on our mind or we're hearing as we're entering into, years beyond FY23. Not to share, we'd say we already have certain priorities or already know where, it's just to say here's, in transparency, here's all the things that are sort of on our radar. And I think first, I'll share this quickly today. I think there was some really exciting news in the community today. Some of you came in and said amazing, exciting. I know our school committee chair called this transformational of the news of that MSBA board of directors voted to invite Killam into the eligibility period. And I know you've all sort of been a part of this process over the past couple of years moving here, which as we know is the 270-day sort of process. With a starting June 1st, which for us a key part of that is likely going to asking town meeting for design funds of around $2 million in November 2022 town meeting. That's just one of sort of the prerequisites of all the different things that are coming in the next 270 days. There's obviously a lot more to talk about. This is hot off the press sort of today. Was I also just like to say too, the financial implications we think are a potential game changer. So we're really excited to share that, really excited to work with the community to kind of move this process forward. I know it wasn't on the agenda tonight, but I think it's a part of this conversation of beyond, FY23.
Absolutely. Nope. Yep. Thanks for mentioning it.
Just one question, did the MSBA give a percentage that they would cover, or is that not happened yet? That's further down, just ask.
I wanted that number today.
Yeah, I'd like to know.
Yeah. You can hear all the pages rustling as they got it. Yeah.
It was,
find it.
But great news for sure.
Absolutely.
Thank you. So what we wanted to start with is a little bit of context. This is just, we're constantly assessing sort of how are we doing in comparison to other districts too. This is, again, we look at sort of our district outcomes in a lot more than just MCAS, right? We all look at a lot of different things that matter to student experience. We did want to start to ground it and just look at the 2021 MCAS data. This is a DESE comparison with districts that DESE has identified as similar districts compared to size and also compared to special populations, what they call the percentage of students who are economically disadvantaged, students with disabilities, and ELs. And it gives you a little bit of an insight sort of to where we compare with those districts in terms of achievement, which is the percent meeting or exceeding expectations, and growth, right, as SGP. And I think what we've seen sort of is that we are, in many of these cases, achieving, at similar rates as some of these districts or slightly behind. So I think I have shared this many times. There are so many positives in our district from our top-notch teaching staff, the best extracurricular activities you can imagine, a community that fiercely and passionately supports education. And I couch all that to say I think we have work to do in terms of academic outcomes that I think would really push us forward and position us to be what we want to be as a top 10 or top 5 district in the state. So we don't want to spend too much time on the data, but I also do think it's important to know that for the community to be transparent of sort of where we stand with similarly, demographic peers, just to ground the conversation. So Jackie, next slide. So some of the things we think about are just what are on our radar to not only improve academic outcomes, but also to improve our district and move us to that, what we want to be as a premier district. These are just a few of the buckets of things that have come up through our work over the past 10 months in listening to the community. First, time on learning. There is a lot of opportunities we feel like to use time effectively, and I'll give one example is at the elementary level. There's a lot of questions around how do we use that half day, the Friday half day. I see some of you nodding. I know you've had kids go through that. Is there a way that we can use that time or sort of eliminate that time to be more effective in closing gaps for students or offering sort of exciting programming for students? We're looking at our middle and high school schedule. Currently at our middle school, math blocks are 47 minutes, and we feel like we have teachers say that's just not enough, right? We have a high school schedule right now that our staff says needs to be revamped to better allow students with choice of where they want, kind of courses they want to take. So we're spending a lot of time looking at time on learning and access through scheduling. Also, we've looked at, we think there's opportunities in summer, vacation, before and after school to use time more effectively to close gaps for students. Second, and I think opportunities aligned to student interest. This goes back to Chris's point. I think computer science is one of those areas. A huge other area we've heard from our community is vocational. So we're trying to think about other ways that we can bring hands-on learning opportunities for our students that align with what some of we see in the job market as a way to create sort of more access for our students at the high school level. That also access, we've identified there's a lot of kind of barriers in access. We feel like at this point that if we are to be able to address this, that these would have a high impact on student outcomes. First, kindergarten, which we'll speak to, higher levels of math. I'm sure many of you have heard of sort of the challenge, in our district now of currently of the way that we structure sort of the trajectory of students' math throughout 6 through 12, that some students are sort of blocked in at an early age from being able to attain the highest level of math that they want. So looking at what are some of the ways that we can remove those barriers. And innovative high school models, dual enrollment, early college are all things that are on our radar. The other night at school committee, I spoke a lot about leadership development, that we say if we can think about what's the biggest lever you can pull to improve student outcomes, that's investing in your school leaders, right? So what are the ways that we invest in our principals to grow and to be more effective in their work? And then lastly, literacy program. I know Tom spoke earlier about replacing what we felt was a inadequate math curriculum for the K to 8 level, and we're already starting to see some really positive trends from doing that. We have similar work to do in literacy. So for those who have sort of followed this work, we have sort of some of the core curriculum that we've been using has been under scrutiny by both Ed Reports and DESE as not sort of meeting the needs of our students. So we think that there is an opportunity here to use curriculum tools that are research-based, that have proven to move the needle for students in a way that we think might transform outcomes in literacy for our students. So those are a few of the things that we've kind of talked about of just are on our horizon, nothing that we're committing to, nothing that we already have a plan to address, but things that we've heard that the community has expressed interest in us looking at. And pairing that with what we know is coming with some of the work ahead for FY 24 decisions we're going to have to make and trade-offs and consider things like that. First, ESSER 3, we know there's several, Tom spoke about roles that are on ESSER 3 that are going to roll off in FY 24. So these are, the team chairs, a couple adjustment counselors, a special ed teacher, elementary paras and tutors. So it's, knowing that those roles will be off the ESSER grant, how do we make sure to think through which roles are roles that we need to invest in moving forward, and which other ones were sort of more pandemic specific, that some of the other investments that we've made around counselors, around some of maybe the dual enrollment opportunities, around other vacation academies where we may not need some of these other pieces in place because we've invested in other areas. We also know that while we had a heavy investment in technology this past year, also if we were to follow a 5-year strict cycle, that would put at 5-year cycle, 466 laptops that would be in need of renewal for FY24, and then also full day kindergarten, which we'll talk about moving forward. Again, we share this to say that we think there's a lot of decisions ahead for us as a community and as a district to think through what are our priorities, what are the things that we need to invest in, what are our student needs. But we're not in a position yet to be able to say we need this but not this, but I think we want to just, again, be transparent with the community about some of the things that are on our radar and some of the things that we were kind of thinking through.
So on that, I mean, and again, this is maybe just goes to the process of setting, again, you had it in the outset of this one, and again, I can't commend you and the staff enough for setting objectives and priorities and things of that nature. But how are you going through, like, from now through the end of this year, beginning of next, and kind of reshuffling the deck and looking at those priorities and then saying, okay, well now, is this one always going to be at the top? And how you look at that piece.
Yeah, great question. So on the last school committee meeting, I presented what we call like a report of entry findings, where I said after listening to all different stakeholders across the community, after spending time in over 90% of our classrooms as an administrative team, we've learned sort of a lot of these things have popped up as opportunities for us moving forward. Now the next phase of that is getting together a group of what we call sort of like a guiding coalition to help us put that into a district strategic plan. We may build on the current district strategic plan. We may sort of just start from scratch. But it's exactly what you said. That team that will be comprised of district administrators, teachers, central office staff, to be able to say, okay, we know that a lot of these are sort of like things that we feel are crucial for our district to be that top tier district. We can't invest in all of these things. We can't invest in all of these things in the short term. How do we start to prioritize, like, what do we need for next year to kind of move us forward? What are the highest impact, biggest return on investments in what we see here? And what are some of the things that maybe we can wait 3 years? What are some of the things that would be nice to have 5 years down the line? So I think that's the work that I can't do in isolation. I think my role so far was to elevate some of the opportunities, and then it's to sit down with a group of people to say, how do we then start to map these into priorities? Because there's a lot of good opportunities ahead, and we just need to start to prioritize and map that out.
Yep. Great, thanks.
And that should be released likely sometime this summer, is the sort of a revised strategic plan or a new strategic plan. Do you want to, we keep going?
Yeah, keep going. Yeah, keep going,
Okay.
sorry.
All right, so that's the big picture. I know that a couple of members of the committee wanted us to talk through kindergarten specifically too. And a few of you have sat through presentations already listening to why full day kindergarten. A few of you, whether it's from me or from others, hold me to this. I will be less than 5 minutes on sharing why full day K, and then we're going to get into sort of what we're thinking on this too. So, Jackie, next slide. So we think that, first of all, universal kindergarten, we think is the cornerstone of a high quality early childhood program. We think that early childhood really sets the stage for the foundation for kids moving forward. As all of you who've sort of looked at research around, what happens in ages 3 to 5 is critically important. We also see more now than ever in this pandemic context, the need for us to invest in our youngest learners, ensure they're on a path for success. And we think early, universal full day K is a part of that. Jackie, next slide. So I'm going to go through just what we think are the 4 arguments that play into this. First, how it aligns to our other district improvement efforts. 2, just the difference in programming and outcomes. 3, the impact on the community. And 4, sort of reputation. So Jackie, next slide. Again, I'm being intentional. I know you all already believe in full day K. It's just a matter of how do we sort of make this sort of, what does it look like realistically?
No, your speed's good.
Yeah. First, it aligns, again, we've talked a lot about social and emotional learning, early literacy instruction, improving outcomes. There is a lot of research to say that investing in our students at a young age is a great sort of return on investment in sort of all of these different areas that we've prioritized. Jackie, next slide. Thank you. We also know if we want to move our students forward sort of in the areas that we've described, there is a difference in sort of what the programming looks like in our full and half day. I think if you currently look at just the core academic piece, that difference, in 3.3 hours for full day versus 2 hours, that matters, right? An extra, over an hour a day of time on learning does matter at a critical age. It's hard for us we're not going to pull up all the data tonight, but it's hard for us to believe that if we have more time on learning, that we're also not going to see sort of better outcomes academically for our youngest learners. Next slide, please.
I don't think I've ever seen that slide before. I thought that's an amazing slide. I don't think I've ever seen that put that way. I think we've talked about it, or maybe I just missed it if they were already there. But that's an amazing slide.
They showed it to you when your kid was in kindergarten, and they introduced you.
I didn't go to that meeting. You know I didn't go there. You know I didn't go to that meeting.
Actually, can I ask a quick question? I'm sorry.
No, yeah, go ahead.
But back to that slide, like, what's the theory on like the percentage of social and structured play that at that stage, like the social aspect is so important?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that if you talk to a lot of early childhood experts, right, that play-based, right, the opportunity for social interaction, for structured collaborative learning is so critical at those years when they're developing social skills. I would rely on a lot of our, with Dr. Hardy and others on our team to be able to speak to kind of the nitty gritty of, what's an ideal schedule in terms of like time on academics and what should academics look like, and sort of more time for just social and structured play. But a lot of the research, highlights that the more you invest in social and structured play with high quality targeted academics, that's where you're going to move the needle for kids at a younger grade.
Great, yeah, thanks.
Okay, you can go next slide. And then a couple of points about just, we know that I believe is not just a school challenge, right? I believe that this is it impacts our community. I had one parent come up to me and say, I have twins this year. So you can do the math, 4,450 times 2, that's $9,000 they're investing, you know, for kindergarten. We also know we're losing students to neighboring, you know, or private schools with the charge, and once students are having a positive experience in some of our our private schools, they stay, right? And I also think that we're seeing that, you know, families having to invest in, pay, even some families who have said, we're paying it, we're not super comfortable paying all of this, it's a huge burden on our family, but we're doing it because we need sort of the full day care too. So I just wanted to highlight too, I've heard from a lot of families over the years, I know many of you have lived it, of just, you know, kind of the burden that this places on families, even those who we know, even financially by our formula, technically can afford it, it doesn't mean it's not a challenge and a burden for those families as well. And then the last argument around this, which I think is a big one, so next slide please, is around just reputation. So I think in terms of a lay of the land, we're one of 23 out of 354 districts that currently charges tuition for kindergarten. So we are significantly behind the times with this. There are a lot of districts who are already in the mode of, you know, universal pre-K at this point, right? And I know it's a tough nut to crack. Like we are working, other districts are struggling with this too. I just, in transparency, this is a trend where we're lagging, right? Other thing in terms of tuition, the average tuition in Massachusetts was $3,318 with a range. You see the range $1,600 to $5,000. Reading was the second highest with $4,450, which again, hopefully this year we move the needle a little bit on that. Next slide, please. If you see a map, you can look at it a little bit closer, just who's still charging, and this is changing by the day. We have a few who just sort of have moved towards, you know, universal free kindergarten. There's a few who are in the process. A few have mapped out multi-year plans to get there, but this is the current, this was the 2019-2020 school year. And then next slide, please. So this is where we shift a little bit to Tom, but I would say, so we understand that this is a real challenge to figure out. Like, I don't think anyone in the community says this isn't something we should invest in. I don't see there's no one I've talked to, so I don't see the merits of this. I don't think that's where the conversation sits. So I don't think I had to convince anyone this is something to invest in. Now, this is something that's really hard to figure out. How do we make this financially viable? And also, how can we do it in a way that also, you know, is aligned with all the other needs in the town and the school side? It's hard. So I think we have, given that how important we think it is, we spent a lot of time looking into how do we pull it off? How do we make it work? And those are conversations that I think our administrative team has had, and our school committee has had. So at this point, I want to turn it over to Tom, and I want to thank Tom publicly, who has done a lot of the behind the scenes work to map out many different sort of ways that we could get there. And I think has really helped to move this work forward to us. Before, we felt like it was something that someday we want to get there, and like someday we'll get. And I feel like now it's like we actually have some potential pathways forward to get there. So thanks to have you up here.
I'll turn it over. Not speaking behind your ear.
No.
So I guess we understood that some people wanted us to really quickly rehash the 7 options we went through, not in detail, but just to say that we looked at a lot of different options. So real quick, you know, we looked at no change. That's an option, but based on everything that was just outlined, it's not one that I think we felt was realistic on a go-forward basis. We looked at one that potentially has other long-term impacts, or it definitely would be long-term more viable, would be a direct cost model. Right now, you may not know this, but the way the revolving fund subsidizes to a degree the regular operating fund, it pays for more than the teachers. So it pays for, you know, principal overhead, custodian overhead, secretary overhead, lights and heat, et cetera, overhead related stuff that you could allocate legally in line. So the direct cost model would say, we're just going to pay for the teachers directly and only that. That was one model we looked at. The next model we looked at was a 6-year step-down model. The school committee in our discussion basically said that's too long. We don't think 6 years is a viable option for us. It will take way too long for us to get to the point where we have, you know, all of our kids available to have free full-day kindergarten. We looked at another one that was a 3-year wind down that was very similar. This is where we started initially in some of the back and forth conversations amongst Susan, Tom, Sean, myself, and a few other people. And that kept, the big difference between this and what we ended up choosing was it kept the students that are currently eligible for free or reduced full-day kindergarten the same population. So that is our special education population that needs it from an IEP basis, and the low-income population that meets it based upon a gradient scale, right? What the next option we looked at was the 3-year high needs option. And what that does is change the definition of what is available for free kindergarten. While we still keep the cost model for those that are not eligible for the free kindergarten over this 3-year period. In particular, it aligns the definition to what DESE calls the high needs population. Tom mentioned that slightly before, but just for those of you who aren't as detailed in the data from a DESE perspective, it's special education, it's English language learners, which is the big difference, and it's low income. So we have seen, as they mentioned earlier, we've already funded it for 1.2 additional this coming year, an increase in the number of English language learners. And we've seen as well that that is the population that's struggling the most at first grade when they come in at half-day kindergarten. So we felt like solving that immediate problem going into next year by offering them free full-day kindergarten was probably the best option. This is one of the later breaking options that we put on the table. And it is the option that the team, from a collective school committee perspective, voted on to move forward with. So what that option will do is put the tuition rates at $3,600 for those that are paying next year. And anybody who is free, special education, low income, that meets the gradient scale, and English language learners would pay nothing, right? So we looked at some trends. We don't actually, maybe we do by now because we're talking about it next Monday, how many English language learners we have coming in for kindergarten next year. But we've had various between 2 and 9 over the last 3 or 4 years. So it might be 5, it might be 7, whatever it is for next year. We then looked at an option that was what the budget was when we first started this process in January, which was, what I called the cliff jump at the time. When the original budget was presented as an option and idea, it was a $3,000 budget from a perspective of how much we're going to charge. And that led to about a $671,000 need coming into FY24. I think we all agreed that was too big of a need going into FY24, which is why we went to the high needs and adjusted the cost model a little bit, but that was one option we looked at as well. And the last option we looked at was, let's just go free next year. What does that look like? Is that viable? How could that happen? I think some members of the committee are still saying, well, maybe that's still an option. If somehow from a town we come together and say it's possible. But as of right now, the committee has voted and agreed on the high needs model. And that's what you see on the page here. Those at home can't see this. We can release it in the packet. It's been in our packet from January as well. But the essence of it is it shows the 3-year model stepping down. So if the anchor year is this year, it's FY22. And one of the questions that people asked as well is what's the revolving account scheduled to be at by the end of this year, right? I think it's around 480,000, but it's actually on the paper if you see it. If you move to the next slide, actually, Jackie, I think it's covered in the next couple slides. Go to the next slide after that, we'll come back to this one. So there you go. So you see FY22 is currently forecasted to end at about 482,000 in the revolving account, give or take. This model draws down from the revolving account in FY23 to bring it down to slightly over 100,000 left. And then in FY24, the revolving account would have 0 left and essentially be closed. That's the plan there. But what that means then is that we will need in FY24 support of slightly over 400,000 in some way, shape, or form. How we get there, as we talked about in January, is part of the ongoing conversations. I think the next slide is going to talk a little bit about, Tom, Fidel, Susan, Sharon, getting together, sharpening pencils where necessary, bringing those of us in the elected or appointed boards together to talk about it as well. But that's conceptually what we're trying to do. There was a previous slide, but I don't need to go back to it, that talks about all the inputs that we put into it and all the thought process in terms of forecasting and whatnot that was part of the process. Somewhat similar to what Andrew was asking for, we looked at just for kindergarten to figure out how to build this model appropriately. So you'll see in that model, we essentially tried to level the costs or the asks over the 3 years of 400,000, 400,000, 400,000, and that incrementally is increasing the school committee, the school allocation. So Jean aptly asked, that means it's 1.2 million? In the end, yes, but it's a stepped up plan to get to that 1.2 million overall increase. So we can't just say here's 400,000 for 1 year and then drop us back down because that puts us in $800,000 hole. So it's got to be thought of in that way. I'll pause there and see if there's questions, comments, thoughts, concerns.
Go ahead, Gene.
I didn't raise my hand.
You did.
Thanks, Tom.
Can we go back to the future considerations FY 24 slide? It's where the ESSER, technology renewal and full day K are listed out.
Yep.
Because this slide is actually what I was most interested in getting at this evening, so I appreciate the clarity of this. So if I'm reading this correctly, actually, can you explain the technology renewal? So the 280, that's money that is currently spent that you would need that isn't currently in the operating budget? Am I understanding that right?
If I can explain,
Yeah, please.
right now, we're using a 5-year replacement value for our technology. We have 466 laptops that will reach 5 years and older in FY 24. So that would be the year that we would swap them out for new.
And that's not built into the current operating budget?
No.
Okay, so this actually is exactly the slide I was looking, so right now, if the current budget passed in FY 23, moving forward to FY 24, just to keep everything the same, just to maintain the level of technology renewal, maintain the tuition, not to free full day K, but the lower tuition that was just approved by the school committee and the new positions created by ESSER, you're looking at a delta of about $1 million. Okay.
Just to clarify, this would be the FY 24 tuition, not the 3,600, but the next step down, which is the 2,650.
Thank you for clearing that. And
Right,
that
You did ask that question before as well.
Yep.
And the research says if we capped it at 3,600 going in, it we'd be talking about 170,000 instead of 400,000.
Okay.
So if we had to, we have that in the back pocket, but we ideally don't want to go to that back pocket.
And so the ESSER funds and full day K tuition, none of that goes through town meeting.
Full day kindergarten theoretically could, it's one option.
I meant the current projections, this deficit that exists never went through town meeting. These are all the result of school decisions that were made.
I wouldn't say the deficit that exists, I would say necessarily, because I don't think we see it as a deficit necessarily. It's a plan to get somewhere. And the conversation of how do we eventually fund that is the greater conversation that has to happen. It's entirely possible that we revert from where we are now of projecting to go free and go to direct costs, for example. If we go with 3,600, 3,600, 3,600, and then 3,600, and then 3,700, 3,800, 3,900 to cover direct costs, because to Andrew's point, our direct costs continue to increase because of 3% on top of 3% on top of 3% in terms of our, teacher contracts, then we could maintain for quite a long time.
Okay.
Right, and we just have to figure out how to close that gap in 1 year, 170,000, and the second year, which is FY 25, about 170,000 as well, which in the grand scheme of things is not a ton of money that we would have to figure out, but we would have to figure it out.
So it sounds like based on the discussions that would happen after town meeting, the school department would be open to something other than a 3-year plan, depending on how those conversations went.
No, I mean, I'm kind of speaking now, I'm to a degree, but I think we are expecting that there will be some further conversations. I don't think we think this is the final answer in any way, shape, or form. If it happens to work as the final answer, we would be happy. We'd be very happy.
Gotcha.
And I think a lot of town members would be very happy. If it doesn't work because of the finances, because of, as Bob laid out for your last meeting, inflation and all of the things that could eat away at our free cash, we'll have to figure things out and get ourselves solid, for lack of a better way.
Me too. I think you spoke on behalf of us very well, eloquently there. And I also think we're looking at sort of all of the different things that are in the FY 22 and 23 budget to analyze sort of what's working for us and make pivots and adjustments as needed. Also, if we look at ESSER 3, we're not also sharing right now that everything's just going to roll over, right? That's our plan either. For example, one of those I can speak to, we've had a hard time filling some of those elementary para and tutor roles. Right, so I think that some of those may not be our best strategy sort of for, moving forward. There's been changes in some just caseloads in different areas too, so I think we're not seeing this as just there's already 471,500 that we know we're going to have to sort of figure out a way to move forward. I think as Tom shared, we have, a couple of, kindergarten, there's some potential flexibility there if needed. We see some flexibility in ESSER 3, so I definitely hear what you're saying with sort of how forecasting this out, but I also think we're already thinking about ways that we would sort of, because also there's some of the things that we think might be more priorities in the previous slide too than what's potentially here. So I think
that's right, and I think this gets back to the question I was asking earlier, is that as you start to look at that, and then again, I just think of this probably more, a little bit more simplistically, but if there's something in there that you wouldn't, and I guess Esther's a little bit different because it wouldn't just go to free cash, but like it's one of those things that you would turn back. And then if you were to turn it back, then it's available to reprioritize to something else. And I think that's, that's the whole, I think the thought process that, that I've been, thinking about is that as you go through this thing, whether we can fill it, whether it doesn't work, whatever the metric is, there's a dollar associated with that, and then, what do you do with it?
Exactly.
Any other questions? Go ahead, Marian.
I've probably asked this before at the financial forum, but I just want to revisit it. As we try to think, getting beyond the next few years for full day K, going back to the budget for next year, so you've added a lot of social-emotional support positions, and we all agree that those are necessary in view of the pandemic. Do we think maybe in 3 or 4 years that we could wind those down and the money could go towards full day K to start plugging those gaps, or do you foresee that we're just gonna, the problems are just, it's gonna take a decade to resolve the kind of issues that the pandemic has created? I'm not trying to be dramatic, but
It's a great,
I'm wondering if we'll need this stuff forever.
it's a great question. I remember you asking that back in the
Right, and so we've had more
fall,
data.
and my thoughts have shifted a little bit on that since we spent a lot of time talking to our school counselors, talking to our social workers, school psychologists, who a lot believe that this is not something that's going to flip a switch within the next year or two, and then we'll sort of be back to the way pre-pandemic context. I think we realize that there's going to be some significant social and emotional needs moving forward. With that said, there's also a lot of confidence from our staff that if we can invest in these younger years with sort of a lot of the social and emotional support, it may lighten sort of the investments that we need sort of as the students move through sort of the secondary level. I don't know.
Right, no, we
But I
can,
think a lot of like nationwide, researchers and, people in education say don't expect this trend of increased social emotional need to go anywhere anytime soon. But I do think that we believe that the investments in particularly counseling and support is going to pay huge dividends for our younger learners that we think will pay off as they move forward.
like possibly reduced special ed costs, or we don't know.
Yeah, I mean, yes, that's.
Because that would free up money for kindergarten without
This is the classic
going.
same conversation we've
Yeah.
had a few times, yes. I mean, not only the adjustment counselors that we've talked about would help that, which research does show adjustment counselors help increase the overall outcome of the school rather significantly as well. But also the literacy related stuff we talked about, right? And the early literacy stuff. Research shows very clearly the brain gets to a point, 3rd and 4th grade, and it becomes harder to learn certain things that you haven't learned by 3rd and 4th grade. So if we can capture those issues, we can potentially save other things. And as I was looking at the budget that you all have now in front of you from a greater perspective, not ours, but the overall town budget, and looking at 2024 and 2025 and some of the forecasts in there, somewhat to Andrew's point, somewhat to Mark's point before, the out of district is going forecasting back up again, right? So some of that is a result of this that we're talking about now, but also what can we do to bring that number back down again? Goes back to some of the literacy curriculum and other things that we've been talking about too. So it's not, this will become permanent, but it's not, we don't know, it's also, we don't know 100%
But I don't think
for
it's
sure
gonna be
yet.
resolved in time to come up with the kindergarten money,
No.
not for,
No.
or any, not for 6 or 7 years maybe.
So we can, we'll move forward. I don't know, Jackie, do you mind just moving forward? Jackie, thank you for doing that behind the scenes for us too. We appreciate it. I think we have a couple of more slides. Just
Yeah, they were on 25, Jackie.
you're good, Ed. Actually, so to kind of close out this part of the conversation too, I think we've appreciated having time with Fidel and Sharon to kind of talk through all of the things that we were just talking about right here. And I think sort of what we've committed to is in May, following the annual town meeting, us meeting together to look at potential sources of funding, and to come forward with a recommendation of potential source of funding, is kind of move forward. I don't know, Fidel, if you want to share anything on that or.
Yeah. I mean, we've had a few really honest conversations, right? I mean, we're having the same issue on our side, right? I mean, we want to do a senior center. We want to hire a sustainability director, right? I mean, and there's a lot of priorities that are coming before us, but I think we as a team are committed to figuring this one out, right? I mean, I've got a 4-year-old, so it's something that is personal to me. Like just what she's learned, right, in these early years, it really does help, right? Going into first grade, knowing colors, knowing letters, right? I mean, it's things that if you're stepping into first grade, right, and you don't have these things, it can drag a classroom, right? I mean, so this is good for the future, I believe. I mean, it's an investment, so we are committed to figure this out. We really are.
We look forward to the partnership and the collaboration ahead that's already been starting on some of these topics and issues. Thank you, Fidel.
Absolutely.
You go to the next slide. A couple other things that have, I know a few select board members have reached out to ask about, and I know a few FinCom members asked about to say, just in terms of wanting some more transparency and clarity around just per pupil spending. So we tried to give this data, we think, in 3 sort of comparable groups here. The first, hopefully this group of towns looks familiar to you, right? The FinCom criteria on the left, you've seen those towns as comparable towns. In the middle, the Middlesex League town or districts, and then also DESI DART, which are the towns and the districts that I used earlier that are compared. Again, the only 3 criteria are size of the district, the grade levels of the district have to be comparable, and percentage of special populations have to be similar. So just wanted to put that up there so that the committee had an understanding just sort of where we fall in terms of per pupil spending throughout some of those categories. And then the next slide too, which is slightly different, which is looking at just the percent of education to town budgets, which is, compares the percent of town expenditures toward, versus education expenditures. Kind of again, against some of those, these are the FinCom comparable towns you see here. This data was collected through cleargov.com, and Susan, I can speak to kind of some of the methodology behind either the slide before this or this slide if you're interested in diving more into kind of where we arrived at some of those numbers.
Can I just ask one question? Yeah. On this comparison, is Reading unique in the way we do accommodated costs and shared costs? And do these other towns do it the same way? Because I'm wondering if that's why their numbers might look like a bigger percent.
Well, the way that ClearGov calculated these data points is they downloaded information from the Department of Revenue, just looking at the total town municipal budget and the percentage of all of the educational costs to that total budget. In Reading, we do things a little bit differently where we take the total funds that are available. We back out accommodated costs, which include utilities and benefits and
out-of-district tuition,
transportation and tuition. And then the funds that remain are split 63, 36, 64, 30, yeah.
63.5, 36.5.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Doug. So to answer your question, this is just a very simply stated the percentage of education versus the total town budget for each one of these communities. within each of those towns, I don't know if they do something similar.
I actually, I have the exact same question, Marianne, and I don't think I understood your answer. I'm
Okay.
sorry. So the question, I think if I'm understanding you, Marianne, is it possible that our percentage is understated because of how we do accommodated costs, which is atypical?
Yeah, that's exactly, you expressed it better than I did, but yeah, that's what I'm just, like,
Do you
what
know
I
if that
think
is
we're similar
accurate?
to Easton, like maybe we're another 4 or 5% if the accommodated
Right, if the
costs were
accommodated
rolled
costs
in.
aren't included, because so many of them are educational, that would be an understated figure.
But that ClearGov doesn't know
The
that.
best way to say that be that everybody files their data to the state with the same codes, and as long as the codes are used properly, this is an accurate representation.
So it should be apples to apples.
Should be apples to apples.
It should be, that's why we were using it. So,
Yeah, I think the other metric in here though is if you look at, and I just did a quick math, our total expenditures, town and schools are the second lowest across all of them. Only Easton spends less overall, and that gets more to how much we bring in. That's, that's
Very residential.
that's, that ends up being, the manifestation of all of this is that there's just less pie, from that perspective. So I think that's, the other dynamic there too.
Perhaps the best comparison there, Ed, is Mansfield.
Yep.
Right? Almost the exact same town expenditure, education expenditure numbers. And they're at 54%, we're at 49%.
Yeah, they're whatever, $4,000 more, that's it.
Well, it's interesting, Dedham's at the bottom, but I think they were the highest price per student, so it's like,
They have the smallest population per student,
Yeah,
only
so-
2,600 students.
That's why, again, these are each just like single data points, right?
Yeah.
That we
Yeah.
look, we're not able to give a.
We saw what you did. We see what you did.
You're not getting more money, Tom.
So, but again, I think some of the figures that, we found these figures off ClearGov and off the DESI website, we think are important just for us to, to generate conversation amongst the community too, so. We can move to the last couple of slides to close out. I think we already talked about this a little bit already of just sort of what we're projecting for end of year savings, some of the ways that we are planning on using that, not only for this year, but beyond, around how, accelerating learning for students, supporting additional social and emotional needs, and some strategic investments for us for the future. I won't get into we gave some examples of things we're already doing at the bottom for this year. And we can go last slide.
Before you switch here.
Yeah.
We haven't talked about this, so this is a kind of blind question here. Can we take and reduce our offset to the full day kindergarten revolving account this year to increase the the amount that we have left over at the end of this year that would allow it to drag out a little further? With some of that 442?
We could look at that because our projected savings of 440.
Because
Are they saying
we have a
move the
$1.1
$442
million
into the
offset in the budget.
That's right.
Of which you could
Then they can't
theoretically
use it
take
for anything
200,000 off that and increase the revolving account a little bit higher.
Keep
As
the-
one way to think about it, if
Yeah.
we're not gonna spend that. Ed, to your point of,
I'm saying, yep.
trying to figure out how some of that could be, that is legal, within bounds,
Of course, yeah.
not over putting that revolving account too high.
Yep.
You just can't use it for any other
You
use.
can't use it for any other use. But theoretically,
It's
we know
lots.
we're paying overhead already with the 1.1 million that we have. So if we go back and we say, well, we don't wanna pay for that overhead this way, then.
And I think that's the point, like if, again, you determine what your priorities are. If that's it, full day K is it, then you do that. You know what I mean? Like then you say, okay, well then we won't do, I'm sorry.
Vacation academies, right?
Yeah, we won't do Vacation Academy. You pick one. And then you're putting more towards the revolving fund.
Correct.
You know what I mean?
Which in situating, again, we'll talk, all about this too. One thing is that we right now we see significant gaps in academic learning, right? So we're do we use the funds right now to try to close some of those gaps now before the end of the year? Or do we invest in other places? I think that's a good point you brought up. And again, to your point, would have to be priorities, trade-offs, return on investment, all those things.
Yeah, I think, and again, I'll do you have anything else?
We have one more slide.
Yeah, go do one more slide, then I'll say this piece.
Is this, there we go. Yeah, it wasn't the question slide.
Well, actually, this was also something that we spoke a little bit earlier, and just as a visual of the dollars that were turned back to the town at the end of each year since 2010, I believe. And then last year, we do know that a large chunk of that $100,000 was related to COVID-specific dollars that we did not spend and that we had chose to use grants for, like the COVID relief grant, the COVID prevention grant, and some of the ESSER funds.
Do you mind just giving an example you gave me that was really helpful with the conversation with Joe Huggins about PPE?
Yes, thank you. So at the end of 21, there was about $175,000 remaining in the facilities budget. And Joe Huggins explained that those dollars were earmarked specifically for COVID supplies and materials, equipment. And they have a huge inventory of all of these materials and just didn't have anything more to spend it on. So that ended up going back to the town. So out of the $830,000, $175,000 was specifically for facilities related COVID expenditures.
Somewhat similar in FY '20 as well, right?
Yep.
This committee knows about the $300,000 that was given to us right at the end of the budget season. We found out we didn't need it, so we gave it back rather than spend it in some other fashion.
Perfect, thank you. So the piece I was just gonna say is, I think a lot of the questions that, I know that I had, and I know that in speaking to other committee members around, the second half, the other bullet that we had, where it discussed future school budget and capital needs. I think a lot of what you did here, there's no answers, because it's buried in the bullet, it's all future. But I think the one thing for me that I feel much more comfortable about is that there's plans. And there's there is this thought that that you identified it and that you're looking at ways to be able to address it. That's not just and it's a and this will be a very crude way of saying this, you're not just dropping it on somebody else's lap. Like we're all in it, together. It's a community, effort to be able to look at what's going to happen outside of FY '23. Look at what's happening in FY '24 and further, and it's a full community, kind of priority.
Yeah, and I think that changes the narrative, right? I mean,
Yep.
This budget is good. It's strong. It's balanced. I mean, we're high-fiving in town meeting, right? I mean, we're good. We know that the future is going to have some unknowns and inflation and challenges, but we feel positive with our new growth that is coming on board, right? I mean, and our free cash position as well, and the team that's on board. Like we're going to tackle this, and we do have some time. So this the tough conversation is going to be in the fall, not on April 25th, right?
No.
On town meeting floor.
Any other questions or comments for Susan and Tom?
Sean has his hand raised.
Who does?
Sean Grant.
More of a statement, I guess, Sean.
Yeah, Sean's not on finance committee anymore, so that doesn't really count. Go ahead, Sean.
Don't I get a, yeah, I'm gonna ask a question, or I'm gonna make a comment anyway, that's okay.
Of course.
So, a couple things. I think, Jean raised a really good point, sort of understanding that, or recognizing that, 9-10 months from now, we're gonna be sort of facing some hard conversations and decisions potentially. I think what we're, dancing around a little bit here is that there's a fundamental conversation that we're sort of starting to initiate about, are we sort of satisfied with the way that we're funding our schools, right? And, Tom shared a couple of, or Dr. Milczewski shared a couple of slides there around, different funding comparisons. And the split of the town budget is a tough one to look at because obviously the number of students you have per capita is, a huge influence on that. But when you look at those per pupil numbers, we're somewhere between the 6th and 40th percentile, depending on which cohort you're looking at in terms of the per pupil expense. And I just sort of challenge people to consider, do you expect to get a 90 or 95th percentile school district with 6th or 40th percentile funding, right? I think Dr. Milczewski and his team have done a great job of identifying some creative, relatively inexpensive, or in some cases even free ways to address some of the needs and gaps that have emerged. And I have every faith that they'll continue to do so over the coming years. But when you look at this list of priorities, you look at this list of needs that we're starting to identify from the entry findings. We're going to have a very real conversation, as a town. It's not just the people on this call, but as a town about what kind of school system we want and what it takes to get there. Because 2.5% increases annually that allow us to sort of maintain the baseline. There's a ceiling on what we can do and what we can offer for our students with that budgeting approach. So I'm thrilled to hear the conversation tonight and hear sort of all the commitment to partnership from all sides and that sort of thing. But that to me feels like the real conversation that we're starting to have, and appropriately so.
Thanks, Sean. Go ahead, Jean.
I have a couple, I think, very quick things. One is a suggestion, if this is okay, in the actual school committee budget. In your calendar, you actually don't mention the finance committee at all. And in October, we give guidance. I actually think in the calendar, I think that would be helpful to have in the school's mind that you get guidance from FinCom in October. You can absolutely disregard it. The school committee has every right to disregard that guidance, but it is part of the process. And this is connected to my next thought. Very, very, very pleased to see the slide on the next sources. The thing I was coming into this meeting tonight very nervous about was this, significant gaps in FY24. So as a FinCom member, I can support the FY23 budget. It's completely balanced, it's within FinCom guidance. But to not acknowledge that there are built-in deficits for FY24 and beyond, and to not have the discussion about how are we going to have that conversation. I'm thrilled to see it addressed, and I completely agree with the kind of collaborative approach that's designed here. I do have two questions on the approach. One is, sometimes when groups of people say, we're all going to work together, but nobody owns it, 6 months goes by and everybody goes, who was supposed to set up that meeting?
We own it. Right?
I like that.
Okay, excellent. So it definitely seems like something that the school department, along with the town manager, should be driving. And I did want to point out that because FinCom guidance is given in October, and that will be for FY24, and it actually looks out into FY25 and 26. The guidance is specific for the next fiscal year, but there is a 3-year forecast. Anything that's going to impact that, whether it be free cash use or the town school split, really needs to be nailed down by August. So I do think in addition to this sort of concept, let's all get together after town meeting, let's figure out some of this stuff. I think having a deadline in our minds about, if any of those are gonna have sort of structural changes to how budgeting in this town has historically been done, you don't wanna be having those conversations in January, 3 months after FinCom guidance came out, because that's sort of unfair to both sides. So I just wanna sort of lay that out as, in addition to this, I do think August should be in our heads as the proposal deadline. And the only other thing I'll add is, in the reason I think the school department needs to drive this is I'm looking at the 4 potential funding sources listed on the slide, and you've got one-time funding. I think ARPA is mentioned specifically. I don't know if free cash is, but free cash is another one-time funding source. You've also got looking at the existing school budget and what might be there, and you're also looking at potentially the municipal side of the budget. The challenge there is they have different authorizing bodies. So we can have a conversation about the municipal budget with the town manager, we can have a conversation about free cash. ARPA is completely separate, and of course your budget completely belongs to you. So I think because you've got 4 different funding authorities, that's why I think the school, in the event that you are gonna have to go to a different authority than the people in this room, that's kind of be on you to kind of advocate. Does that make sense? Everything I'm saying? Felt a little rambly.
Yeah, they're just yesing you to death.
I know.
No one got that. Just joking. Go ahead, Mary.
Just a question anyone in this room can answer if they know. Who votes and decides on the town school split?
Town meeting.
Is it town meeting?
No, I mean, technically, there's no vote on that.
No, it's not.
Right, it's a decision you all make in your guidance in October when you give the,
Town meeting can do whatever they want with our guidance.
well, they could, they could, right? They could bump our budget and decrease the town budget, but that hasn't practically happened in a real time, in a real long time.
I mean, I tried, like, if you read the municipal budget, which we on FinCom got, I mean, the former town manager kind of has a letter, an outline where he sort of describes how it came about and how, 15 years ago he came up with this split to try to resolve fights over special ed, but he was on FinCom at the time. but I really don't know who makes the decision, or whether it just evolves.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think,
I think it's a little bit of a chicken and the egg thing in the sense that, when the initial sort of budget guidance is prepared, it's based on the assumption that we're going to follow the split, but the split, sort of informally exists between the town manager and the superintendent to some degree as a starting point for the budgets, right? So, if there were a desire to sort of reevaluate that, reassess that, I think it would have to be something that would, sort of be on the table for the right folks to discuss prior to that budget guidance being developed in the fall.
Agreed. Go ahead, Jane.
Okay, so
yeah,
it's not
no,
us.
yeah, I completely agree. I think that you sort of have multiple hurdles. One is, do you just want to ask or do you want to have it be collaborative? It sounds like the approach is collaborative. So step one is exactly what you've laid out, is some conversations among staff about what we can do, how this, my suspicion, and I've felt this way since January when I first heard this, is it's going to be multiple. I don't think there's going to be one source. I think it's going to be a fairly complicated solution to a fairly complicated problem. So I think you've got that step, but then, yeah, I mean, it ultimately will go to town meeting, so FinCom will or won't recommend the budget. So there is a FinCom vote that presumably has some weight. But then ultimately, I mean, the answer to the question, who decides it? FinCom, not the opposite of FinCom, not FinCom.
Freudian slip.
Town meeting, frankly, while there is sort of past precedent, town meeting decides. I mean, town meeting absolutely decides how much, the bottom line school budget, they 100% decide that, and they decide how much the town, the answer is town meeting.
But town meeting, they can line item veto the town budget, but they can't change the school, but like,
They
could town
can
meeting
take-
just say, no, let's cut $1 million out of the town and go shift it to schools?
You're right, they couldn't like just say, yeah, we're gonna make it 70-30, like they couldn't do that. What they could do to affect the same thing is say, we're gonna take this much from that town line, and we're gonna put it towards the school budget.
Yeah,
It would
but they
affect
can't,
the
but they
same
can't
thing.
do the reverse. They could never make the school budget smaller and give more to the town. It's
Oh, they
like-
definitely could.
At a top line.
Oh, yeah.
Just at
Absolutely.
a
They
line.
just can't go into the five.
Not just not a line
five
item,
subcategories,
yeah.
They
can at
could-
the top line.
What is the total of this budget?
52.
50, thank you, it's just over
Yeah.
50, they can absolutely say,
So they
make it
would just be
54, make it
the
49.
top
they-
line.
yeah.
Okay.
And then it would revert to the school committee to pass a new budget that aligns with that allocation.
We promise that will not happen.
This is your first one, so I don't know, I mean, it's tough to promise something before you've seen. You haven't walked into that arena yet.
To bring this to town meeting where the House is divided, we all lose it. That happens.
Absolutely.
So I promise you, and I know that Tom agrees, I mean, our goal is to walk in this where all parties are satisfied.
And I'm so glad that you just said that, Fidel, because I think that's why I'm very defensive of the budgeting process. It's boring, nobody wants to hear about it. But when you really go through this process of guidance comes out in October, and then there's all these public meetings, and then the school committee votes, and then we meet, like, by the time it gets to town meeting, I think there's this really high level of understanding, like 6 months of work went into this budget. So I think if we all kind of respect that process, I think it leads to that kind of consensus that you're talking about, where people can feel good about the outcome.
Yeah, I think and that leads to that whole process. That's why financial forums are important. That's why, because all of that education and then outreach to everyone that wants to listen, and then those that, you just kind of reach, the more times you say it, the more people you reach. And that was actually something that, again, I mentioned in the school committee, from a FinCom perspective, if that's a forum that we want to be able to utilize in the, in the summer, I mean, they'll be the ones that are going to be mad at you if you want to have a, kind of a summer financial forum. But that, I mean, I'll do it. I'll do it if we have to. No, but that's definitely something I think on our end, that if that's the right facility to do it, I think that's the right.
Until July 15th.
We'll do a
we have
retreat.
remote meetings.
On the
Right over
beach.
July 4th. Yeah, right over July 4th. That'd be great. Yeah.
Yeah, July 3rd.
Yeah, July 3rd is perfect. Yeah, exactly. That'll get some good attendance. Any other kind of questions or comments for schools?
Do you have to officially vote to recommend ours tonight, or is that something you're doing some other time?
Yeah, we're gonna do that some other time.
I think we do them all at the
We do
end.
them all at the end. go to the former chair. And anytime I'm in doubt, just look to him. Rock.
I just wanna thank you for giving us the chance to come tonight to have, I think, great conversation with your questions, your feedback. I think you've made us think through a lot of things and given us a lot of good feedback, so that's helpful. And I also just wanna say, one of the things I've learned very quickly in this community really, really values education, is really passionate about education, and you can feel that in these conversations tonight. So thank you to you and to the community for your continued support. And if you have other questions on things like that we talked about tonight, feel free to reach out. We're happy to have more stuff. But thank you for the support of the partnership.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually, yeah, there was probably a couple in, in the weed type of things that I had, but, those can, I'll send them.
You know where to find us.
Absolutely, absolutely. No, really good, really, really
Mark
appreciate it.
Baxter does have his hand raised.
Why? Go ahead, Mark. Go ahead, Mark.
Well, if you call on me, I'd let you know. Thank you, Ed. Thanks, everybody. I just wanted to kind of add a little bit in terms of kind of the end of the discussion and kind of where we're culminating in terms of coming together as a community and thinking about where our priorities are, what our priorities are, and then focusing on those things. And I think that's kind of exactly where we need to come to. Is think about those things. And Jean, you stated nicely some of the different possible ways of doing things. Obviously, if there are grants to do different aspects, that's another pile that we want to look at as well. But figuring out how we work through these top priorities, I think, is what we all need to do. And I think financial forums are one way of doing that. Kind of these gatherings where we talk about all the priorities, have the discussions, look at different funding sources. That's exactly what we got to do. So I'm just kind of clapping my hands to the discussion and the process.
Thanks, Mark. I appreciate that. Again, really, I can't thank you enough. Again, the amount of time that went into putting all this together, I know it's not insignificant. So I really appreciate it. It was, again, every time, and I know I can speak just for myself. I've seen this a few times. I take something out of it every time. So I really appreciate, all the effort, on that. So it was, I think we're coming out of that as a very well-informed body, based on, the time and effort on your side. So we can't thank you enough for that. Not bad, right?
Great.
Just made that up on the fly. All right, great.
One more motion?
Do we need?
the minutes.
Actually, well, yeah,
Two
so
more motions.
actually, let's hold there. Mark, did you want to, we're kind of done with this point. Did you want to adjourn the select board?
Yes, please. Can I ask one of the other select board members to make a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Is there a second? I'll second.
There you go. You're not going to
All
get
those in favor, we'll go by roll call. So Chris,
Yes.
Carlo?
He's already gone.
Yes.
No, there he is.
Thanks. And Mark, yes. Thanks, we're adjourned. Thanks, folks. Thanks for
Thank you,
inviting me.
guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
No, okay.
Move to approve the FinCom meeting minutes dated February 16th, 2022.
Second.
Thanks, Joe. Jackie, as usual, fantastic job on the minutes. They were
Thank you, Jeff.
excellent. At least from my kind of commentary. I haven't read them in a while, so when I read this last one, they looked great. Just kidding. It's cool. So any other discussion or questions on minutes? We'll go to the vote. Jackie McCarthy.
No, or yes, sorry, yes.
No.
No questions, yes to me.
Scary. Andrew.
Yes.
Mary Ann.
Yes.
Mark.
Yes.
Jean.
Yes.
Joe.
Yes.
Jeffrey.
To abstain.
Eric.
Yes.
And Ed, yes. 9-0 passes. And then we just need one more, Jean.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Thanks, Mark. I don't know if I should start with Jackie. Yeah, go ahead, Jackie.
Yes.
No, perfect. Andrew.
Yes.
Mary Ann.
Yes.
Mark.
Yes.
Jean.
Yes.
Joe.
Yes.
Jeffrey.
Yes.
Eric.
Yes.
Ed. Yes.
Yeah.
We're adjourned. Yes, yeah. We're adjourned.
I feel like we should